What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We've got the number 2 ranked contender in the Bantamweight division, Cory Sandhagen, 14 wins and 2 losses, taking on the currently unranked 2-time Bantamweight champion, TJ Dillashaw, 16 wins and 4 losses. This fight, taking place on July 24th, marks the long-awaited return of former 2-time Bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw. He's been out of action for the past 2.5 years because he tested positive in the pre- and post-fight drug tests for EPO. And this was around the time TJ Dillashaw lost to Henry Cejudo when he tried to go down in weight to flyweight and fight for Cejudo's belt, which would have made TJ Dillashaw a champ in the bantamweight and flyweight divisions. And you can't find too many greater falls from grace. I mean, TJ Dillashaw was absolutely rolling. And then not only does he lose that dare to be great drop down in weight to fight Cejudo, but then test positive for performance enhancing drugs. It's totally derailing all of the momentum that he had going in solidifying his legacy. Now, you can't really talk TJ Dillashaw without bringing up 2 names, really. Or 3 names if you want to count Dominick Cruz, which for a long time was his only loss during a run that he had been on from 2014 to the time he lost to Cejudo in 2019. So in a 5-year period, he was just rocking and rolling. And then hit the stumbling block when he lost his bantamweight title for the first time before recapturing it later. But he had lost the title to Dominick Cruz. So aside from Dominick Cruz, the other 2 names that you need to consider when mentioning TJ Dillashaw and his career are Renan Barão and Cody Garbrandt. Now, Renan Barão was a total badass in the bantamweight division. He had beaten Uriah Faber back in 2012 for the interim UFC Bantamweight title. And this is when Dominick Cruz was champ but was having a lot of injury issues. So they issued the interim title. Renan Barão beat Uriah Faber and then defended that interim belt 2 more times against Michael McDonald and Eddie Wineland. And then after the Eddie Wineland fight, they promoted to actual UFC Bantamweight champion. So after he was promoted to official champ, he then defends that Bantamweight title against Uriah Faber, beats him via TKO, and I cannot stress, beating Uriah Faber was a big deal at that time. So Renan Barão, after that second win over Uriah Faber, was basically, he was 32-1-1, and that one loss was his first mixed martial arts fight all the way back in 2005. So Renan Barão was super highly regarded, a champion with multiple successful title defenses, a 32-1 record, and then he fights TJ Dillashaw, loses that fight dramatically via head kick and then a follow-up with punches. TJ Dillashaw becomes the UFC Bantamweight champion. And they would rematch a couple fights later, and Renan Barão, this basically spelled the beginning of the end for Barão. So basically, after being 32-1, he loses to Dillashaw, loses again to Dillashaw 2 fights later, and then goes on to lose his next 6 out of 7 fights. That's how steep the cliff for Renan Barão was. And TJ Dillashaw kind of represents the major turning point in Barão's career. So after TJ Dillashaw wins that title from Renan Barão, he defended the title successfully twice, the second of which was in that rematch versus Renan Barão where he TKOs Barão again. So that's 2 knockout losses where TJ Dillashaw stops Renan Barão. And then Dillashaw defends the title against Dominick Cruz, the former champion, who didn't lose his title through an actual fight. He vacated the title because of those reoccurring injuries that have really kind of hamstrung this second half of Dominick Cruz's career. Great fighter. He basically comes back to settle the score. He beats TJ Dillashaw, takes his belt back, defends it successfully in a decision win over Uriah Faber, and then fights Cody Garbrandt, this super talented, surging, boxing-heavy prospect. And Cody Garbrandt basically has the fight of his life versus Dominick Cruz, or should I say performance of his life, because this was a pretty one-sided fight, a shocking, dominating win for Cody Garbrandt over Dominick Cruz, shocks the MMA world, captures the belt from Dominick Cruz. Dominick Cruz has never won the championship back since that. So Cody Garbrandt's your champ. TJ Dillashaw, after losing the title to Cruz, who lost it to Garbrandt, Dillashaw goes on and beats Rafael Asunciao, who had beaten him via decision several years back. Dillashaw then beats John Lineker, and then he fights his former training and camp partner, Cody Garbrandt, in basically a grudge match. Like, these guys were having the Ultimate Fighter, so they were the coaches. A lot of bad blood between Dillashaw and Garbrandt. Garbrandt's hype at this time was super high because of how he beat Dominick Cruz, who again beat TJ Dillashaw. So here we go, Dillashaw versus Garbrandt. The stakes are high, and Dillashaw TKOs Cody Garbrandt with punches. It was unbelievable. Because check it out, Cody Garbrandt was looking invincible in that fight versus Dominick Cruz. He was looking like a pound-for-pound elite in that fight. And it's weird. It's almost like he hit this super high peak, and then since that, losses and injuries and COVID, all these things have derailed Cody Garbrandt since, and he hasn't ever recaptured that magic that he showed against Dominick Cruz in that sensational title win. So after Dillashaw then knocks Cody Garbrandt off that pedestal with that TKO win to recapture the Bantamweight title, Dillashaw then gives Cody Garbrandt a rematch and then knocks Cody Garbrandt out again. So this grudge match is basically settled. TJ Dillashaw reaps all the reward and the spoils of being the champion, once again beating Cody Garbrandt twice, back-to-back fights, both by stoppage knockouts. This basically sends Cody Garbrandt's career spiraling in a similar way, really, that Renan Barão's career spiraled after 2 losses in a row to TJ Dillashaw. Then Dillashaw drops down to flyweight, challenges the new champion over there, Henry Cejudo, who had just beaten Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, longtime flyweight champ, to the point where they were topping him at the very top of the pound-for-pound rankings, first, second, or third, because of how dominant Mighty Mouse was at flyweight. He finally loses the title via close decision to Henry Cejudo. Then Dillashaw drops down from bantamweight 135 to flyweight 125 to try to become, again, the champ in multiple divisions. Loses against Henry Cejudo via first round TKO. He got clipped, he got hurt again. It was a, kind of questionable stoppage, but most people didn't have a big problem with it. Henry Cejudo shockingly stops TJ Dillashaw. Dillashaw then tests positive for those performance enhancing drugs, and he was suspended multiple years. His last fight against Henry Cejudo was in January of 2019. So we're talking 2.5-year layoff at this point. Dillashaw left the game at like 32, 33 years old. He is now 35 years old, and he's making his return against the current number 2 ranked contender, Cory Sandhagen, who has been a surging sensation in the division over the past, 2 to 3 years, basically. He won his first 3 UFC fights via stoppage, 2 by knockout, 1 via submission. This was back in like 2018 against, lesser competition. And then he fights John Lineker and passes that step up in class challenge via decision. He looked really good against Lineker. Then he fights Rafael Asunciao on that UFC 241 undercard. That was Cormier versus Stipe 2. Sanhagen fights Rafael Asunciao, wins that fight via unanimous decision. By the way, his win over Lineker was a split decision. So although he looked really good, I thought he should have won via unanimous decision, but one judge had it going to Lineker. But in this next fight against Asunciao, it was a unanimous decision win for Sanhagen. So Sanhagen is still surging, hasn't lost since he's been to the UFC, and then he fights Aljamain Sterling. This is at UFC 250. That was Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer, and then the co-main, I think, was Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Asunciao, where Cody Garbrandt landed that one-punch knockout. That was basically his one shining moment since those 2 losses to TJ Dillashaw. But on that UFC 250 undercard, Aljamain Sterling fights Cory Sandhagen. This is basically a battle of 2 of the highest contenders in the division. And in the first round, Aljamain Sterling, the current champion in the division, who's on a short hiatus due to injury, he earned his title in a disqualification win against the then champ Peter Yan. not a controversial disqualification, but the rule that then transitions the title automatically to Aljamain Sterling, who was, it was a competitive fight, but it was going in the wrong direction for him. He was starting to take a beating, and then he got kneed while he was down. Disqualification, Aljamain Sterling's the new champ. But before that, the fight that got him in position to fight for the title was because he fought Cory Sandhagen at UFC 250, and he choked him out in the first round. Stunning win for Sterling, and a pretty shocking and pretty devastating loss for Cory Sandhagen, who, as I said, was just surging at that point. Big setback for him. But when he returned to the cage against Marlon Moraes, a former super highly ranked contender himself, he fought for the vacant Bantamweight title in the wake of TJ Dillashaw's stripping. Marlon Moraes is the one who fought Henry Cejudo for that vacant title. Henry Cejudo, it was a very back and forth fight. Marlon Moraes actually had a great first round against Henry Cejudo, but Henry Cejudo turned things around, ended up TKOing Moraes in the third round, and Marlon Moraes' career since then has been spiraling a bit. I think he's lost like 2 out of his last 3 or 3 out of his last 4, something like that. But one of those losses was Moraes versus Sanhagen, and Sanhagen does a beautiful spinning kick, clips Marlon Moraes, ends up stopping him in the second round. Beautiful win for Cory Sandhagen versus Moraes, and then Sanhagen fights former lightweight champ, great veteran, Frankie Edgar, probably a future Hall of Famer in the sport. So in Sanhagen versus Frankie Edgar, in the first round, not only the first round, but the first 30 seconds of the round, Cory Sandhagen catches Frankie Edgar with a beautiful jumping, like a flying knee, caught him perfectly, knocks Frankie Edgar out cold. Devastating knockout, certainly has to be a knockout of the year contender. And with that sensational win, that brings us to Cory Sandhagen versus the return of TJ Dillashaw. Cory Sandhagen, as I said, is looking super dangerous as he's been surging through the UFC. His one setback since joining the UFC was that first round chokeout loss to Aljamain Sterling. He's taking on TJ Dillashaw. And I can't help but looking at some of the dynamics here. One of them being the height gap. TJ Dillashaw is 5'6" to Cory Sandhagen's 5'11". Sandhagen is very tall for the division, and he uses that range as well. And, generally it wouldn't be a huge issue for Dillashaw, who's very explosive, takes very sophisticated angles, very quick with the hands and the feet, footwork on point. He just knows exactly what the hell he's doing. Super experienced, and he's able to thread the needle timing wise with when he collapses the pocket, kind of ambushes with a 1-2 punch combination, includes a kick in that combination, so it could be 3 to 4 strikes in some of those combinations. Again, very explosive, doesn't get caught slipping too much. He got caught against Henry Cejudo, but even in the fight that he lost before Cejudo a few years back to Dominick Cruz is another slightly taller than normal fighter for that bantamweight division. Cruz is about 5'8", still 3 inches shorter than Sanhagen. But yeah, Dillashaw had a little problem with the way that Dominick Cruz moves around the cage and controls range. Now with Sanhagen, again, those dynamics are even further exaggerated. TJ Dillashaw has a 67-inch reach compared to Cory Sandhagen's 70-inch reach, so that is, somewhat significant, only 3 inches, but when you factor in the height as well, I think it does make a difference. But more so than that, this is a 35-year-old taking on a 29-year-old, and on its face, that might not make or break where you would swing with who you favor in this fight. But then when you couple that with the 2.5 years of inactivity, and while granted, that can do certain fighters some good, if they've been taking a beating. Sometimes a little time off will do you some good. But I also think that throws off your timing, your in-fight rhythm, all of the things that have to be clicking on all cylinders for you to perform at your best. And that time gap is just too great for me to ignore as it pertains to TJ Dillashaw, not to mention, the different psychological ramifications of perhaps being on the performance-enhancing drugs and then being absent or devoid of those performance-enhancing drugs. Sometimes psychologically the fighter doesn't have the same self-belief because they were somewhat reliant on these enhancements. So let's assume Dillashaw is in the right place psychologically, and let's say that he's not, super rusty, he's been training super well, and let's say that it transitions into the live fight scenario here. Still, when I look at the range and I look at TJ Dillashaw's style, you know, I see him as almost having a Michael Chandler-like path to victory. And I don't mean Michael Chandler when he takes the guy down and will wrestle for 5 rounds or 3 rounds like he did against, you know, Brett Primus back in Bellator. And I mean, Dillashaw can wrestle. He's a former NCAA Division I wrestler. Cal State Fullerton, stand up. I'm an Anaheim boy, so. But from a striking perspective, yes, Dillashaw can threaten the takedown, and I think that that's a threat that, you know, Sanhagen's going to have to be taking very seriously. You know, and maybe that threat of a takedown can open up striking opportunities. So, you know, one thing that I'll say Michael Chandler, and I'm just saying that because these are 2 guys who are kind of, you know, a little shorter for the division and are very explosive. So Chandler will sometimes start hitting low and will threaten with lower body punches and takedowns and then explode high. That's, you know, in part how he caught Dan Hooker, another much taller fighter. So, you know, if you look at Chandler and Hooker and their height and reach dynamics and even their styles a little bit, it's a little bit reminiscent of TJ Dillashaw and Cory Sandhagen. So Cory Sandhagen will anticipate some of these things, perhaps, like he did against Frankie Edgar. He might have thought Frankie Edgar was about to collapse and go low, so then that's when he exploded with that flying knee, put his lights out. And I think that the inactivity will kind of disrupt Dillashaw's ability to thread the needle timing-wise, which he's been a master of doing, and sometimes just the slightest drop-off in that, whether it's because of the inactivity or because of the age or just because Cory Sandhagen is timing things perfectly. I feel like the margin for error is pretty slim for both these guys because Dillashaw can't put Cory Sandhagen's lights out and vice versa. So this will be very, very interesting. And, you know, I'm actually going to go with Cory Sandhagen via stoppage here. You know, I was thinking about going Sandhagen via decision. And if it wasn't for the inactivity and the, you know, 35 years of age, I would look at this fight much, much closer. Perhaps even favor TJ Dillashaw. But as things stand right now, I just feel like Cory Sandhagen is so much in his groove, and Dillashaw is basically trying to get back into the groove. And Sanhagen is just a very, very tough guy to fight on your return to the cage. So in this one, I see Dillashaw having some success, you know, kind of pinning Sanhagen up against the cage a little bit, maybe even securing a takedown. I don't necessarily think he's going to do a ton of damage in the first round with those takedowns, and this could also be a relatively slow starting first round, kind of a feel-out round. But by the second round, I think that it's going to be Sanhagen who's able to kind of control the distance. Dillashaw's going to have to move his feet in a very Dillashaw-like way to continuously close the distance so then Dillashaw can get some effective strikes off, including leg kicks. I'm also looking at a battle of leg kicks here. I think that's going to be a significant factor. But the longer this fight goes, the more difficult I think it's going to be for Dillashaw to continuously close the distance because of age and inactivity, and because I think Sanhagen's going to make him pay for attempting to approach and will eventually deter some of that over pursuing from Dillashaw. Even though Dillashaw is very diligent and selective in when he picks his spots, I just think that the leg kicks, the strikes at range that Sanhagen's going to be able to employ or deploy versus Dillashaw is going to end up showing itself more and more by the time we get to the third round. So then it's going to look like, okay, Sanhagen's taking control. Dillashaw's going to have to press the issue a little too much, which is only going to make him a little bit more vulnerable. I'm kind of looking at a third or fourth round TKO stoppage for Cory Sandhagen here. But please, let me know what you think about the return of TJ Dillashaw and how you see Sanhagen versus Dillashaw playing out. This is a very exciting fight, and I hope that the winner of this fight takes on the eventual winner of the Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan rematch. But please, leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.